There aren't too many games I'm looking forward to as we come to the end of 2025. I'd say the only one that's catching my eye now is Octopath Traveler 0. Though that doesn't mean I've been able to get to all of the games on my list that have already released. There are some that I've had to set aside. But one I wasn't going to do that for was an RPG that I'm certain not many people know about. Ever since its announcement back near the end of 2023, I have been keeping an eye on Stray Children.
すいません。警察の者ですが。
Which was noted as the last RPG that veteran developer Yoshiro Kimura would work on after his 30-year career. For those who need a refresher on who Kimura is, he was a game designer for Squaresoft before leaving them in the mid-90s, with him contributing to games like the original Romancing Saga 2. Upon leaving Square, he, along with others, created Love the Lick, an independent organisation that we now would know as an indie studio. And at a time when games like Final Fantasy VII were finding their way to home consoles, Love the Lick's inaugural project would be something that was effectively a parody of RPGs and was called Moon Remix RPG Adventure. Unlike many contemporaries, Moon moved away from the chosen hero archetype often seen in other games and instead gave players control of a supporting character, with this individual helping others following the damage caused by the hero's actions. The hero, for example, would be breaking into people's homes and stealing their stuff, a common trait seen in these games, and as such Moon became a sort of meta-commentary on JRPGs by giving players a humorous perspective on them while also being a love letter at the same time. While it's fair to say that it wasn't as big a commercial success as Square's latest Final Fantasy, it did garner a cult following of its own, and even those who didn't play it would use it as inspiration for their own projects. One such person was Toby Fox, who was one big reason why Moon later came to Switch and Steam with an English translation 2 decades later. Now, if you're not too familiar on who Fox is, there's a good chance you'll know what he worked on, that being Undertale. Undertale took inspiration from many RPGs, with its pacifist route to combat being heavily influenced by Moon, this idea that the player can help people rather than hurt them. Fast forward to 2023 and later 2025 for the West, and Yoshiro Kimura with his new RPG has effectively come full circle. Stray Children is a game that by his own admission has been inspired by Undertale. Is that what caught my eye for Stray Children? No. Because I haven't played Undertale. Stray Children simply looked like a game that I would enjoy. The art style, the atmosphere, it ticked a lot of boxes as far as first impressions go, though its initial announcement in 2023 for a Japanese-only release had me keeping a side glance at it rather than actively keeping tabs. In 2025 though, the confirmation was made. Stray Children not only would get a Steam version but also an English release, and thus it immediately went on to my must-play list for 2025. And I'm glad I did prioritise it. Stray Children was not only one of the games I was excited for, but it also delivered in many respects. It's a breath of fresh air as a JRPG player. It has the familiarity in some cases to make me realise that, yes, I'm still playing one, but it's also distinctly different in many ways too. And that allows it to stand out all the more. And I want to tell you why I think Stray Children deserves your attention before the year is out. Even right at the beginning, Stray Children breaks the mould. There is no title screen, no new game option. As soon as I started the game, it was the company logo and then straight to the game itself. Within about 5 seconds, I was playing Stray Children. You take control of a dog-faced protagonist, a child who is in search of his lost father. Said father is a game developer, and with the help of a character called Ken, which I actually think is quite ironic considering my character's TKN and Ken is a YouTuber who I watch quite a lot, so weird combination there, but whatever. Ken acts as a sort of assistant to the protag, and they deduce that his father may have become lost in one of his games. With this knowledge, the two enter the RPG called Crescent Moon, a game that never released but was still made into a cartridge, and from there it doesn't take too long for the strange feel of Stray Children to hit home. Even in those first few hours, I was getting an idea of what Stray Children was. Much like Moon, it was as much a celebration of RPGs with concepts like the chosen hero, while also being a sideways glance at the common characteristics they show. In this case, the world of Crescent Moon is effectively rotting away. It's a game world that was created, but has not been visited by any players over the course of 30 years. And as such, all the characters, or NPCs within it, are jaded and devoid of purpose, though it does have elements of humour despite how bleak it may seem. This balance of comedy and a more serious undertone is the foundation of the entire game's narrative. You'll be moving from land to land, with each one having its own unique visual style and self-contained problems, and part of the appeal of Stray Children is not only seeing how they look and what the underlying theme of the zone is, which in itself ties into its more visual and symbolic storytelling, but also what kind of crazy events you might see. There were many times when I was just taking in a scene with amazement and wide eyes because it was so weird. But it's not weird for the sake of being weird. This is just what Stray Children is. Even from the trailers, I knew this game wasn't going to be like the vast amount of JRPGs I play. It's a game that presented itself as different, and it embraces that for pretty much the entire runtime, which for my own playthrough took around 23 hours. In addition, I do have to give props to both the OST and art style here. The art style in particular is a very interesting take visually. It's kind of like watching a group of claymation models within a pre-rendered world, not to mention being supported by fantastic animation. I've already mentioned that all the worlds look distinct from one another, but it was one of the parts of the game that kept me engaged, and one reason for that is because of how well they're presented. Now, as for the game itself, it's nothing you're not familiar with if you've played a JRPG. You only have control of the protag, but you can equip them with items to boost stats and also talk to NPCs around the world to push the story along. Each area essentially becomes a puzzle in of itself in terms of how you progress. There are permanent stat boosting consumables that are spread around too, so there's definitely incentive to explore, though exploration is something you'll just naturally want to do for reasons we'll be touching on later. One thing becomes apparent very early on. The children that inhabit these lands are cautious of the so-called Olders, who are basically malformed representations of jaded adults, and it's these that the protag will often be fighting. Stray Children uses a turn-based style to combat, but it's not your typical approach to it by any stretch. This is one of the bigger choices the player needs to make. Do they kill the Older, or do they instead attempt to talk to them and go down the pacifist route, thus releasing their soul? And while there are no difficulty options, this effectively becomes the split between normal and hard mode. Simply killing the Olders is easy enough. You attack, hit your timed inputs for more damage, and dodge their attacks, which is normally represented as some sort of minigame like Pac-Man or Frogger. Playing the game in this way, you'll likely not have too many problems. The real challenge comes if you choose to talk to them, as this is where you will need to choose the correct options in sequence to eventually allow them to accept their emotions and pass on. You will have to get generally about 4 options correct in a row, because if you get one wrong, the entire chain starts from the beginning. So there is certainly an element of trial and error here. It's not uncommon to be sifting through the options until you find the correct one, all the while getting attacked if you get them wrong. Still, Stray Children doesn't leave you completely blind, as there are husks of the enemies scattered around the world, and they will give you hints on what options to take. Some of them will be rooted in common knowledge. For example, there is an Older in this game who has a hint stating that they are researching the perfect circle, and when you see the options, you'll notice that they represent pi, so you simply need to choose the numbers in the correct order. There are others that will give you a general clue, like 3 favourite foods, which clues you in that you choose the food-related options, but if you look at the illustration in the book, you'll see a small graphic which shows the order in which you pick the foods during the fight. These hints are all well and good. They give enough to the player so they're not shooting in the dark. However, there are also hints that are near on completely worthless. In the final dungeon there was an Older hint that gave me only the last answer and nothing else. So the other 4 answers I had to figure out for myself, which basically bloated the combat time until I found the correct combination. As for the reason why the pacifist route is the game's hard mode in all but name, it simply comes down to two reasons. One, you're taking more damage as you'll need to dodge more attacks, and two, as soon as you pacify the enemy, you will get experience, but you will no longer bump into that holder for random encounters. They're gone forever. So in other words, you fight less, meaning you get lower experience and thus level up less frequently, and that means your stats are lower on average, while also dealing with more attacks as you try to work through the trial and error of what choices to make while talking. It's this element of trial and error that becomes the double-edged sword for stray children. There's a fine balance that needs to be struck when using it. I'm personally fine with trial and error in increments as long as there is some form of hint to set me off on the right path. And Stray Children does have that, I've mentioned those hints. But it also does veer into relying too much on trial and error at points, especially in its combat. It doesn't happen too often thankfully, but there were a few enemies, like I've said before, that I felt were given very little clues, and as such they became frustrating if I chose to use the pacifist route to combat. And here's the thing, it's not just the enemies you can do this to, you can do it to the bosses as well. But for the bosses, you often need a key item found in the zone before you enter the fight, because if you don't have this, the options effectively block off. And this is why exploration is so important. If you want to pacify all the enemies, you will need to find these items. Now why would you want to willingly engage in pacifying the enemies and going down that hard mode route? Well, quite simply, I'd say there's a very likely chance that there is a hidden or true ending behind the peaceful route, much like there was in Undertale. On my playthrough, I finished the game, got a thank you message for playing Stray Children, and after that it just restarted right from the beginning. No credits, nothing, as if waking from a dream and then repeating it from the start. And as far as I could see, my levels didn't carry over either, so the New Game Plus run seems to be a blank slate. I'm confident in saying that there is a true ending here, and maybe even a true ending boss, but I don't think I'll be able to find them. Despite me being quite thorough in my exploration of each land, there were a few key items that I couldn't find. And the issue with Stray Children is that if you want to see that pacifist run right through to the end, you need to be perfect, because there is only one save file in this game. So if you miss something, you cannot go back to rectify the issue. It's locked out for the rest of the run. It's one of those games where I am happy to play it blind initially, but for a second run and to find all those missables, I would definitely be using a guide of some sort. The problem is, Stray Children doesn't seem to have an English walkthrough of any sort, which is not surprising considering how niche it actually is. Like I say, there are not many people who know about this game, not in the West at least. Still, if an English walkthrough of the game is made, I'd be happy to play a second time, because the game was enjoyable for me. It's not the best game I've played this year, but it's definitely gonna be on a few positive lists in the future. It's a nice feeling when you've been waiting for a game, a lesser known game in this instance, and it ends up delivering. Stray Children no doubt has some issues, like its single save file and trial and error imbalance, but the core of the game is so unique and fresh to many JRPGs I play that it stands out for all the right reasons. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe for more JRPG content and consider joining my Patreon if you're interested. Peace.